guys, it's Christy here from the Stamp Cycle, and welcome to another video for my YouTube channel and blog. For today's video, I'm going to be showing you how you can create your own embossing folders from your die cuts. Now, for the example I'm showing you today, I'm using this new Thinlet set from the Stampin Up 2016 Holiday Catalog. This is called Pretty Pines. Any die cuts that you have will work for this technique, but because it's the fall and everybody's getting into the Christmas spirit, I wanted to use this really adorable new Thinlet set that we have from Stampin' Up. I also showed you the coordinating stamp set there at the beginning. We're not using that for this card, but I did want to show it to you because it is super adorable as well. Now I've got the pine cone die from that set, and I'm going to cut out a ton of these die cuts of that pine. I've got a piece of thick Whisper White here. The reason why I'm using the thick Whisper White is the thicker the die cut, the better embossed impression you're going to get. So when you see here in a little bit the finished embossing folder, you'll see that these die cuts being thicker will give you a better impressed image. But definitely try this with the different weights of cardstock that you have to see what you like the best. So I ended up cutting out about 15 of these pine cones, and after I cut all of them out, I needed to go in and get all of these little pieces out. So how I do that is I just use my pokey tool. I know there's other tools out there like a brush that you can use to quickly get out all of these little pieces of the die cuts, but I find that my pokey tool works great, and I don't mind sitting there kind of doing this tedious task of poking out all of these little die cuts. I don't find that it's a big deal, but you do want to go through and get out all of those little pieces from all of your die cuts. And once you have all of your die cuts ready, this is when you're going to start building that embossing folder. So I have a piece of Whisper White cardstock, not the thick, this is just the plain Whisper White cardstock. And I'm going to use my T-ruler here to find the center of this piece of cardstock. This is a piece of cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So I want to find that center. And the reason why I want to find that center is that is where I'm going to glue my first die cut pine cone. And then I'm going to build my pattern across the rest of this cardstock from that center pine cone. Now you can create whatever pattern you want for your embossing folder, but for me, I wanted a very straight kind of symmetrical look, so that's why I found the center of my cardstock here to put that first die cut down. So I'm just using some two-way glue to glue all these die cuts down. So I've applied some of that to the back of this first pine cone die cut, and I'm gluing that to the very center of this piece of cardstock. And then what I'm going to do is just build my pattern from there. So for my first row of pine cones, I'm going to glue an additional pine cone evenly spaced, as evenly as I can. I'm eyeballing it here, on the right and the left-hand side of that center pine cone. If you wanted to have an exact pattern, you could come in here and measure out a bunch more grid lines to make sure you're getting your die cuts exactly even. But I just didn't really want to go to all that trouble, so I'm just eyeballing the rest of this pattern. So now that I have that first center row down, I'm going to build the second row, and I'm offsetting those pine cones. So I'm gluing the second row in between the pine cones of that first center row. When I get to the edges, I am going to go ahead and glue the pine cone where it would be if this was a bigger sheet of paper, and then I'll just cut off any of the die cuts that are hanging over the edge. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So then what I'm going to do is just keep building this entire pattern across that whole sheet of paper, that whole sheet of cardstock. And what I did for the very top and the very bottom rows is I realized that I could just cut that top row off and use the tops of that die cut for the bottom row. So that kind of saved me from having to waste more die cuts. I could have done that on the edges too, but I didn't think about it until I'd already glued them. So there's a tip for you after the fact. So now that I have them all glued down, I'm just going to cut off any excess that's hanging over, and then this creates our embossing folder. Now it's not an embossing folder like I'm sure you have in your craft stash, but this does give you the same effect as an embossing folder. So it is basically just maybe like an embossing tool, maybe you could call it, because it's not really a folder. But those die cuts, especially if you use thick cardstock, really give you a very nice embossed image. So since I use that two-way glue pen to glue down my die cuts, I do have some stickiness still, and I don't want this embossing folder to stick to my cardstock, so I'm just heavily treating that with my embossing buddy to get rid of any of that sticky glue that's still there. So now I'm going to take this embossing folder and I'm going to emboss a piece of Sierra Sand cardstock that I've cut down slightly smaller than that embossing folder that we created. Now I have one of the new Big Shots from Stampin' Up, and it has these new cutting platforms, and I'm using those to build my my platform for embossing here. So I have my platform, my thin die adapter, a cutting plate. Then I have the embossing folder that we created with the die cuts facing up. I put the cardstock on top of that embossing folder, and then I did add this shim in. When I tested out my trial run for this, I needed that shim because I didn't use the thick cardstock, and I ended up getting this stuck in my Big Shot. So don't do what I do. Run it through without a shim first. Every single die cutting machine is different, so definitely try it out before you add a shim because you might not need it, and you don't want your cutting pads and stuff to get stuck like mine did. So just try it out and see what works for your embossing machine. So check that out. How cool is that? So we have a completely embossed piece of cardstock using die cuts. So this is a super, super cool technique. You know, try this out with any die cuts you have and see what kind of result you get. So fun. So now it's time to finish the rest of our card. So I've got this other new Thinlet set from Stampin' Up. This is from the Paisley and Posies bundle, and I'm going to be using that leaf image there, and I've cut that out of mint macaron. And then I'm going to come back in with that Pretty Pines Thinlets, and I'm going to die cut all three of those pine cone images. I used some, that is Delightful Dijon, then I have some Daffodil Delight, and then some Soft Suede. And I'm going to stack those on top of each other, and it's going to create a pineapple. Super cute, huh? Who would have guessed you could take a pine cone die and create a pineapple? But I thought this looked just like a pineapple, and so there you go. Another way to use this die set. So you just want to glue. I'm just using some snail here to glue all of my layers together. So the Soft Suede is the very bottom. I've got that Daffodil Delight in the middle, and then the Delightful Dijon on top. And then I'm just going to glue that mint macaron kind of leaf die cut there to the top, and then that creates a adorable pine cone. I love that. That's super cute. And then to build the rest of the card, I've made a top folding A2 card base out of some more of that Sierra Sand cardstock. I've got a piece of black striped vellum. That was from a vellum pack from last year's holiday catalog. And then I've got these dies here. I got these off the clearance rack. So hey, if you haven't checked out the Stampin' Up clearance rack in a while, you might want to go check it out because there's some really cool stuff there. So I used that Grateful die from that Thinlet set, and I cut out the word grateful from some gold foil. And now I've got my Crazy for You stamp set here, and I'm going to just use the 4U stamps, and I'm going to stamp those onto a piece of basic black cardstock using Versamark ink. I am going to heat emboss this, so I did treat that basic black cardstock with my embossing buddy. So I'll just stamp that 4U as even as I can on this piece of basic black cardstock. Then I'm going to come in with some white embossing powder, and then I'll just heat set that. So that's going to give us Grateful for You is going to be what our sentiment says at the very end. So I'll just come in here, heat that with my heat tool. For these Wow embossing powders, I just use a scrap piece of paper to just pour my embossing powder on, and then just funnel it back into that that little embossing, what would you call that? Whatever it is, what the embossing powder come in. I can't think here at the moment. So now I'm just going to glue that Grateful die cut to the front of my pineapple here. I just want to glue on the first two letters to the pineapple. And then I also cut out that same die cut from some fun foam. And I'm going to glue just the part of the word that's hanging off of that pineapple. I'm just going to add the fun foam there so that I get even dimension across this sentiment die cut. I didn't want it to get smashed or messed up in the mail, so I really wanted it sturdy. So that's why I added that fun foam to the back. Instead of having to cut out tiny little pieces of dimensionals, fun foam is really great for sentiments like that to give them even dimension. So now I've just glued that basic black cardstock onto the front that has the For You. Then I just glued that vellum there to the very top. And then I'm going to just glue the pineapple that has the sentiment attached to it to the front. I'm going to set some blocks on there to make sure that it gets nice and adhered before we finish this card. So then you just want to trim off any excess that's hanging off there. And then I'm going to use a generous amount of this 3M foam tape. I wanted to add some dimension to that layer as well, so I just have a ton of this foam tape that I'm just adding all over to the back of this, and then I will adhere that down to my card base, and that finishes the card. So I really encourage you to take a look at the die cuts that you have and experiment with making your own embossing folders. I have so many other ideas and so many other die cuts that I want to try this technique with. It's super easy to do. Just remember that every die cut machine is different. So you want to test yours out with these folders to get the right sandwich, to get the depth of embossing that you're looking for. So thank you guys for joining me today, and I will catch you guys on the next video. Bye!